forms of creativity. I'm excited for tonight's conversation around, it's not tonight, it's the morning right now. So this morning's conversation on digital media art. Our first speaker is Q. She is a Chinese artist, creative technologist, and educator based in Los Angeles. Trained as an architect, she creates digital, physical, and social spaces exploring issues around gender, immigration, power, and technology. Their most recent collaborative projects, The Future of Memory, was a recipient of the Mozilla Creative Media Award. At the Processing Foundation, Q is the lead of P5JS, an open source art and education platform that prioritizes access and diversity in learning to code, with over 1.5 million users. She currently teaches creative coding as an adjunct associate professor at USC Media Arts and Practice, and 3D Arts at Parsons School of Design. Q is a NYU ITP IMA Project Fellow and Civic Media Fellow at USC Annenberg Innovation Lab. Let's give it up for our first speaker, Q.
Thanks, Caco.
Q, take it away.
Okay, here we go. Thanks, Caco, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me. My name is Qianqian. I also go by Q. Like Caco mentioned, I'm an artist from China, currently based in LA. My full-time job is that I lead P5.js at the Processing Foundation, and I also teach creative coding at USC. Today, I will share some of my personal project and my thoughts about software with emphasis on the word soft. So before I start the talk, I'd like to ask these two questions. Who has access to use and create software? Who determines how the software is used and made? The first project I will share is a ongoing project called Kai. That's the only personal project I will share today. So this word Kai is a mix of ocean in Hawaiian and Chinese. It is a collaboration with Kanaka Mali artist Tiade Rubux. Kai is a series of virtual and AR, virtual and augmented reality installations using Pacific and Asian Pacific Islander stories. I was born and raised in Wenzhou, a coastal city in China, where the red pin is on the map. During pandemic, I wasn't able to go back to China for more than 3 years. So this project started in 2021 when I was really homesick. I spent a lot of time crossing the Pacific Ocean to visit my hometown Wenzhou via Google Map. After doing that for a while, I called my good friend Tiade, who's an Hawaiian indigenous filmmaker. We talked for hours about Pacific Ocean and home. And we decided to collaborate on a project about Trans-Pacific stories, which became the Kai project. So this is a screenshot of where I'm based with a blue dot and where I was originally from in the red dot. And the massive Pacific Ocean was a subject that we are very interested in exploring in this project. Tiade and I started to share with each other the stories and mythologies about Pacific Ocean from our homeland. The first mythological figure we looked into is Mazu, a Chinese sea goddess who protects fishermen and sailors. She was thought to roam the seas, protecting her believers. Her worship spreads around China, China's coastal regions, like where I'm from, to Hawaii, like the Mazu Temple in the middle, and to Los Angeles, where I'm based. So here's a temple in Meizhou, Honolulu, and LA. And this temple is very close to where I live. Tiade started to share with each other the stories and the mythologies about ocean. In the beginning, I used 3D modeling and renders as a tool to explore concepts of Kai. So in this conceptual rendering, the left side is a visual representation of the living deity, Hinaupuhuakua, goddess of corals and spiny creature in the ocean from Hawaiian mythology, which will be mentioned in a later part. And the right side is a visual representation of Chinese sea witch or sea goddess Mazu. I think our initial idea for this project is like, what if these two goddesses meet? What will happen? What will they talk about? Will they inspire us to think about our current and past and current and future? We were invited to show an augmented reality piece at a fashion show in Honolulu. So we made an Nakili. Nakili is the augmented reality sculpture draws inspiration from the living deity Hinaupuhuakua that I mentioned earlier, which is a goddess of coral and spiny creature. The slide shows Nakili AR sculpture in Kamena Beach in Honolulu. Let's hope the video will work here. At the same time as Nakili, we also launched the AR face filter called Hina to blend the coral forms onto the face. This piece also challenges question: who gets to own our face and body? Who gets to use the technology that has been used by big tech firms to create like AR filters or AR face filters that monetize the tool. Facebook and Snapchat are not inventors of facial and body augmentation. Our ancestors had a lot of practice on that. How can we reclaim that technology? Then we're commissioned to create a second chapter for Kaihai for an online art show, which is also shown at a gallery in Hong Kong. So the online art show was part of a work by Epoch Gallery by Peter Wu. We started to research the more tangible connections in the Pacific Ocean, particularly a physical object that connects California and Hong Kong, Asia-America Gateway Submarine Cable System. So it is a 12,000-ish mile long submarine communication cable system, connects Southeast Asia with the mainland of the United States across Pacific Ocean via Guam, Hawaii, and a lot of other lands, island in the ocean. And it's so interesting to see the owner list of the cable and how to think about like what's this ownership of this cable and who owns this part of the ocean. So when we're doing research about the underwater cable, I think we're curious about this question, like who owns it, who get benefit from it? Is that a form of colonization of the seabed? And also, it's very interesting to think about how the internet cable affects geographies and how this become like a physical undersea infrastructure that affects a lot of ecology down there that we sometimes maybe are not aware of, but they do actually affect our day-to-day life. So on the left side, there was this news screenshot saying that global internet was attacked by a shark. And also, there are a lot of when we're doing research about the cable, we found out that like how some deep sea creatures we'll never see, for example, like the sea pigs, how they like to hang around the cable because it's warmer there, because the data pass through. So we created AAG, which is short for Asia America Gateway. It is a AR sculpture and digital storyteller manifested as a trans-Pacific deity born from the submarine internet cable. So this is a speculative goddess that we created. So this screenshot shows the goddess AAG merge at the internet cable landing point in Hong Kong, where the art show was at. The piece discussed the desire for human connections across Pacific Ocean. So this VR experience also include a 10-minute dialogue between AAG, which is this goddess, and the two oceanic deities that I mentioned earlier, Mazu and Hinapuhuakua. And the Mazu in that dialogue was narrated by me, and the Hinapuhuakua was narrated by Tiare, my collaborator. So we were very interested in exploring the hybrid of organic and inorganic in the form of this goddess. For example, the cable and the sea pigs, and a lot of the form of the deity itself. So let's in this dialogue, this is like one snippet of the 10-minute dialogue. So in this dialogue, we'll hear very soon. I talk about the two deities having a discussion, and then the unknown goddess who later reviewed as AAG, start to introduce himself.
That is good to hear. You navigate for the humans then, in exchange for their stories?
No, they navigate through me. I simply provide passage.
So, you're a conduit. That seems more like the essence of Aqua. Conduit for the humans, built by the humans, constantly growing.
You are also how we are speaking across the ocean.
That is because of the soft ones. The sea pigs, the anemone. They have shown me a different way of existing that has allowed me to speak to and connect you.
Your arms touch Hawaii and Hong Kong, where we are near now.
I have extensions that end at those places, yes. The arm of which you speak also connects to the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia.
So you trace the original migratory paths of my people.
And the places my people live, the paths of which people have traversed the ocean, a hybrid of the organic and the inorganic, birth and star, from Asian oceanic migrations, from the desire to communicate between generations, geographies, and languages, between islands and coasts. Yeah, so as of today, if you search the word Hinaupuakula on Google Image, which is a goddess I mentioned earlier, the goddess of coral and spiny creature, you will likely find around 20 images. Among them, 7 of the 20 images of the search result are from our Kaihai project. This really indicates the importance of preserve and reimagine the female and queer mythology stories, besides the popular superhero type, often male mythological figures. Can we reclaim our own, stories and like visual representation of it? When we're doing research about Hinaupuakua or a lot of some other goddess in Pacific Ocean, we really found the lack of visual representation of them, because I think folks or like major media production firm companies or industries, they are more interested in showing like more like male hero figures. But how about the female and like queer figures that maybe has less visual representations? Can we contribute to that? So this is like the most recent chapter. I actually skipped a few chapters in the middle. I want to talk about the most recent one. So this is a Kaihai Plastia Su, which is a project we started in 2023. This is currently shown at the Oceanside Museum of Art in south of LA as part of the Getty PST initiative. This piece, it's a video work. It explores the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that's roaming around in the ocean by linking the geographies and the deities across the Pacific Ocean. So this time, it's also a conversation between Mazu, the goddess of seafarers from China, to Hamia, who burst the Hawaiian Islands and is continuously reborn in her offspring. So in this piece, Plastia, we realize it's got this goddess from the need to remediate microplastic from the ocean. So she continues gives birth to her new children and is reborn each time within them in order to restore the ocean to its natural state. So that's concludes like the personal project Kaihai. So next I'd like to talk about P5.js, which has been playing a big part of my life last few years. I'm interested in how we make software together with the community and how to bring folks who are underrepresented in art and tech field in the process. I started my role leading P5 full-time a few years ago. So for folks who don't know what P5 is, it's an open source JavaScript library that makes coding accessible and inclusive with around 1.5 million users. P5 has been used and taught around the world as an intro to programming for participants who never coded before. So this slide shows P5 workshop for K-12 kiddo students in New York, for elders in Korea, in a workshop called P5 for 50 plus, and also workshops in Chile and Nairobi. I actually taught myself coding via P5 around like eight or 7 years ago. by watching YouTube videos. Since I didn't have any computer science training, I find P5 as such a welcoming language and community to get to know more about programming. As a little P5.js, I got these comments a lot. I actually gonna read some of them. Your software should just be a neutral product. Your feature list is not long enough. You don't fix bugs fast enough. Your releases are too slow. You need to scale faster. You are not technical enough to be here. You are investing your time and resource in unnecessary and unimportant matters. Your software is too political. It got me to think: what is the software for? Who the software? Who gets to write software, and who has, you know, who owns the space when we talk? Who takes the space when we talk about the software? That's some of the comments I got, but later I want to share like some of the practice P5 as a community has been doing. So Access has been a main focus of P5 as a software library and a community. In 2019, P5 community decided that P5 will not add any new features except those that increase access. Access here means inclusion and accessibility, more specifically web accessibility for people who who are blind or visually impaired, as shown in a workshop and testing session led by Claire at NYU. So this decision of not adding any new feature except those increased access has really created a lot of like interesting conversations on our GitHub. So now when you request a new feature on P5 GitHub repository, you'll be asked this question right here: how would this new feature help increase access to P5.js? We hope this is a field. This text field can help ourselves and like to encourage our contributor to think more about like what's the value of P5. But sometimes we do have contributors who just leave this required field as empty or just saying, I don't know. And if that's the case, you know, we'll continue the conversation in the comment section below and start to like, I would like to like encourage to extend the conversation more about like, why do you think this certain feature will increase access for P5? Another collective effort for access is translating P5 to other languages. In the essay, How to Write Non-Violent Creative Code by Olivia Rose, there's this quote: we acknowledged and discuss the way in which P5 is built upon and benefits from the colonial projects like the English language, the internet, and their related infrastructure. The current P5 website has been translated to 4 languages: Spanish, Simplified Chinese, Korean, and Hindi. My first contribution to P5 community actually was by translating, not by coding. We have a lot of other community translation projects like the P5 Japanese translation, P5 French translation. We haven't added them to our official website because the consideration of our capacity to maintain them. We think it's important to update our understanding of access to P5 constantly within community through events like P5 Access Day, where we invite contributors and community members to talk about topics like critical web accessibility, disability arts, accessibility and community building, and access via translation. The creator of P5.js, Lauren McCarthy, wrote an essay about making P5, which discuss a lot, which ask a lot of like wonderful questions. And there's this quote I'd like to share. We were contributors. We would see that our open source project had so many more needs than just code. People come to contribute to P5 with so many different formats, like by debugging, by adding documentations, by making tutorials, by like making work and talking to people about it, by asking us questions and help us understand more about like our project. P5 has, actually I didn't update the number. We have more than 700 contributors now, and we follow this all contributor specification. So left side is all the different type of contributions we acknowledge. So each contributor, they can add themselves by adding this emojis behind their name, so we know what kind of contributions they did. P5 also has more than 50 stewards It's impossible to imagine one single person, like a lead, could solve every single problem of open source software, especially for P5. There's so many different modules like WebGL, DOM, like color and shapes and typography. How can we bring the power of the community? So we had this system called like stewards, where anyone can sign up to be a steward as long as they're interested in learning more about the field. For example, we have people sign up to be the accessibility steward or color stewards, and they don't need to be expert of that field as long as they are interested in learning more and get engaged. And often we find steward could be a great path for interested contributors to move even closer to the project. We have maintainers who were the stewards before. So I think this is a great way for us to bring people to engage with P5 in different capacity. Working with open source software is working with people. Open source software, often appear faceless, actually, hiding the individuals behind them. Like when folks think about P5, I don't know what kind of face they see. However, behind every open source project, there are real people with bodies and feelings. I'm interested in highlighting the human part of the open source software. My current approach might be like often sharing memes when I release P5. Like there's a few Twitter posts that I made when we released 1.4.2 and 1.6.6. When I first started leading P5, I wrote an essay called Tending the P5 Duck Garden. I often feel like the P5 community makes me feel like I'm just working on a garden. And the green square up here on GitHub feels like a green patch to me. So I don't know if any folks are familiar with GitHub UI. They have like this green square here to indicate like how much contribution you did each day. So it's almost like marks the log of your contribution. And my partner turned this to like a green garden for me using Midjourney, I believe. And then also lately I've been interested in doing this research called care work in open source software, which later I can share some of the links. So I'd like to circle back to the question I asked earlier about who gets to make software, who gets to decide how we use and create it. Can we challenge the way we were told about how open source software should be built? We ask these questions because sometimes solutions won't matter if the questions were wrong. Do you see the human face behind software when using it? How does the software make you feel? Can the concept of care itself be open sourced? How can we take care of each other? How can we foster care and intimacy in online space such as GitHub? Is the platform we use for software development accessible for all? How can we prioritize care, intention, slowness over speed in our work? How do we create safe and welcoming space for new contributors? How do we empower contributors? How can we make the software and community accessible to disabled people? How can we distribute financial support to a wider community of contributors without being in the capitalist framework? What are the steps we need to take from coding to caring? I asked a lot of questions here. I don't necessarily have the answers for it, but I'd love to share a quote from an artist I really admire. Amy Wibowo also goes by CLHG on internet. She has this wonderful quote called, "Put the soft in software." And I will use this to conclude my talk today. If you're interested, feel free to reach out. The P5 project is undergoing a very interesting, exciting moment. As I'm transitioning out of this leadership role, there will be a new lead coming. So P5 was created 10 years ago by Lauren McCarthy, and I've been leading this for almost 4 years. And I think we initially had this idea of rotating leadership, that we'll have new leads coming once in a while. And I think I feel like I've been taking a lot of space in this project last few years already. I'm very excited to see who will come lead for the next chapter of P5.js. Yeah, that's all.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Q. I appreciated all those questions. Great questions, something to think about. Our next speaker is Galo Canizaries. He's an artist, designer, writer, and educator working across various creative fields from architecture to digital art to experimental software. He is currently an assistant professor of architecture at the University of Kentucky's College of Design, where he teaches courses on visualization and directs the Critical Software Lab. Galo's work interrogates the emergent socio-technical effects of code, screens, and software culture. He's fascinated by the strange behaviors and aesthetics unique to computing and digital media, an interest that emerged as a kid playing with Flash and other painting software. In 2019, Galo published a collection of essays on computational art and design titled Digital Fabrications, Designer Stories for a Software-Based Planet. Give it up for our next speaker, Galo. Woo! Take it away,
Thanks,
Galo.
Caco. All right, let me, uh-oh. I'm getting a preferences issue here with Teams.
What are we seeing?
I think it's a permissions issue. I might have to rejoin. Just give me 1 second.
Sure thing. So I guess while Galo's gone, I think it's fascinating that you translated all that stuff from English to, like, you taught yourself programming, and then you did a whole bunch of like technical writing translation. How long did that process take?
So let me actually make the clarification. I didn't translate them all.
Okay.
So all the P5 projects that I mentioned, they're all collective efforts.
Okay.
So for example, the P5 translation, it's done by a big group of people for different languages, and we're still constantly working on it. And P5 Chinese translation in particular was initiated by Kenneth Lim, who is currently a P5 mentor, and I was just supporting small part of it. So
That's
go ahead,
fantastic.
Galo.
Because I've seen some of your tutorials, and I was like, oh, whoa, these are in Chinese. This is amazing. All right, Galo, take it away.
Great. Can you hear me? Good. Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Caco, for the invitation. I know that I was supposed to moderate, but I'm stepping up a little bit to present some of my work. So bear with me. It's going to be a little bit improvised. But thank you, Q, for your presentation. I think you touch on a lot of this same interests and concerns that I have relating to software and the use of software, the distribution of software, and how it kind of other models of sharing software, both as an artifact but also as knowledge, are possible. And so I'm a big fan of P5JS. I've been using it for a number of years now. And so I just wanted to share maybe some of the work that I've made that actually uses either processing or P5JS, and how that kind of fits into my conceptual practice, my digital media practice, but also how it fits into my research as an academic, because I am a tenure track assistant professor at the College of Design here at the University of Kentucky. And so to start with, I just wanted to show my project Raster, which was released with the ArtBlocks curated platform back in 2022. If you're not familiar with ArtBlocks, it's a unique generative art platform that is designed or was built to kind of showcase contemporary generative code-based art on the blockchain. And so it is fundamentally a kind of NFT platform, but I think ArtBlocks is unique in that it also tries to foster a kind of community around digital arts and the instruments that we use to both make digital art, but also kind of research it and then kind of critically look at it. And so I really like the kind of initiatives that ArtBlocks does, and I was fortunate enough to work with them on this project. And this project, I'm just going to kind of cycle through some small samples of this project. It's a generative art project that still remains probably one of my most intricate generative art projects to date. For a long time, I was kind of using creative code platforms and software like processing and P5.js, just to make really fun animations that would allow me to do something different from the traditional tools of architecture. So my training is in architecture, and I'm used to using like 3D modeling tools, CAD tools, very precise drawing tools, and following architectural conventions in my representations. And what I found with the creative coding tools like processing and P5.js is that you could really build your own drawing mechanisms, and you can build your own instrument in a way. And I was really fascinated with that because it allowed me to kind of break free from just like orthographic drawing, just making, very precise line drawings, and start to play with things like animation and procedural generative color, procedural behaviors, and kind of almost like representations that felt like they could come alive in some way. And so I started to think about really seriously about making animated paintings that could feel like they're painting themselves forever, right? I was looking at this concept of a kind of abstract expressionism and the kind of textural paintings from the mid 20th century, like the work of Clifford Still or Rothko, for instance. And I was thinking about what would be the digital equivalent of that painterly quality. And I just couldn't get this idea of a painting that paints itself forever out of my head. And so I set out to kind of program a series of paintings that would feel like they're sort of constantly sort of painting themselves, and it never ends, essentially, right? And so Raster is really a kind of project that came out of that. It was released as 400 unique artworks. And so, users logged on to art blocks, and it was sold at a certain price. And once you bought the iteration, the program itself, the JavaScript code, would generate a unique iteration of the series. And so what was really kind of exciting about this way of working is that you never really know what you're going to get. And so in designing the system, you have to make it, complex enough so that each iteration is unique, but also fits within the logic of the series, right? So there's always this kind of push and pull when you're working in a generative mode. And there was a total of 400 unique artworks that were minted. So the series is pretty big, when you compare it to like a regular painting series, right? And so 400 unique artworks is kind of a kind of daunting number of artworks to think about as being part of a series, but that's really what generative systems allow you to produce, right? And so then that, I think, started to influence the way that I was thinking about a project, right? Is a project just one artwork, or is it a kind of series, or is it a limited series, or is it, an potentially infinite series where you can always generate a new version of the artwork itself just by, feeding it a different random number seed or something like that. And so Raster really kind of changed the way that I was looking at generative artworks. And I started to think about what else can these generative artworks do in terms of like questioning the painterly dialogues of digital art, right? Because there's always this idea, I think, in digital art that maybe some people want to make it look like real oil painting or real oil pastels or something like that. But I was really looking at this medium as something that's made up fundamentally of digital information, right? Of pixels. And so this website, raster.club, is essentially the kind of narrative that tells the story of Raster. And here you see some earlier iterations when, they were when the algorithm was being developed. And what I started to kind of frame raster around is this idea of the materiality of pixels, right? Pixels have a totally different materiality than oil paint or, charcoal or something like that. And what makes them unique is that they do rely on information, but they also rely on the kind of relationships between the pixels themselves, right? Pixel to pixel relationships. And so I started to think about the different ways that we've developed to create different pixel to pixel effects, right? So things like dithering algorithms or feedback effects, where the color of one pixel kind of bleeds into other pixels over time as the kind of image is sort of repeated or something like that. And so raster combines a lot of these questions, and here's a kind of explanation of how the system is kind of built up. So from a kind of structural point of view, the canvas is divided into these different points, and then these points are connected in kind of random ways. And I should also mention that this was built in P5.js, just to kind of continue that thread. And so these points are then maybe they're like shifted a little bit to create a little bit more dynamic movement. And then a particle is kind of introduced to trace that gesture to produce this sort of automated gesture, right? I'm not using anything very complicated like particle systems or agent systems or AI. This doesn't use any of that. This is like pretty rudimentary, just points that are following a trajectory. And then those points essentially get layered, and there's a feedback effect that is introduced to make the pixel to pixel relationships kind of bleed. And you sort of see that the image, as these gestures kind of layer themselves, they start to kind of pool, almost like watercolor kind of pools in different areas. And this is because there's a kind of noise algorithm in the background as well that is controlling the density of the color. And so in the end, you get this sort of layered effect that is it's separated into its color using a dithering algorithm. And they have these unique color palettes that each iteration can kind of choose from. And it also has this different features that vary between iteration to iteration. There's some level of chaos that becomes a kind of parameter, but really what you end up with is this kind of pixelated, textured, animated painting that just paints itself forever. So the gestures are always kind of over painting themselves. And for me, this really kind of established a new line of research into not just tool making, but also exploring two-dimensional rasterization effects and animation. And so this led to a series of other projects that are also generative art projects. Some of them were released with this gallery called Verse. I've worked with Verse a couple of times, and they've been pretty supportive about my work. And what I like about Verse is that they've allowed me to sort of pursue this digital art exploration in different mediums or different formats, basically, right? So this is a sort of a similar algorithm to what raster was producing, or the way that raster was structured, but this is an animated GIF. And so this was actually made in processing. So it's not P5.js, but the similar algorithm from raster is used in processing to output animated GIFs. And so this is 90 frames that are repeated over and over again, but they're seamlessly repeated. And so it follows this idea of this perpetual painting. And I love the kind of subtlety of this series, because it becomes less about the gestures that were really emphasized in raster. And this becomes more about the movement of the color. And so the colors still continue to bleed into each other, but there's no real visible gestures. Now it becomes a little bit more like a field that is blending into another sort of structure over time. And what I think is really nice about this series, or what I think was pretty successful, is this almost meditative quality, right? It does kind of feel a little bit like mid-century paintings or something like that. But obviously there's this element of time, right? And color, and the color is sort of manipulated over time to produce some other kinds of effects that are pretty much impossible, and they're only really able to do so because of the digital aspect of it, right? The animated GIF becomes the sort of native format of the internet in a way. And so I think using a GIF as a format to explore what the materiality of pixels is, I think is very fitting. And so I'm not going to go through all of these, maybe just one more. There's also this idea of resolution. And so you can sort of see that there's some chunkier pixels than others. And so there's like pixels, there's the individual pixels that make up the full resolution, but then there's these chunkier pixels that are made by layering different color buffers, essentially at different resolutions. And this is something that I've really tried to explore a lot, which is layering different resolutions in one set of canvases in processing in P5.js. Because it leads to these really interesting forms. And then as an architect, I'm also interested in not just making kind of aesthetic explorations, but also making instruments that could be used by other people. And so I've got this kind of side project as part of my architectural practice called Office Ka, where I make open source tools in the spirit of P5.js, but with very limited functionalities, because I don't think I have enough time to make an entire open source project. But I am super interested in open source and sharing of knowledge and sharing technical knowledge and making this type of knowledge accessible. And so you can see that this website is public domain, right? I've not copyrighted any of this code. But these are different apps that allow you to play with 3D models in different ways. So I call these kind of 3D toys. And this one is called Inverter, where you can load a model that's made in, for example, Rhinoceros or something. Let me just upload a model here. This is a kind of crazy one. And so this is a model of a house. And what Inverter does is it performs a Mobius transformation on the 3D model and turns the model inside out. And so it creates this really kind of exaggerated warping that uses the fourth dimensional vector transformation to totally change your perception of a 3D model. And I think it's just kind of exciting as a kind of visualization. This is mostly just a kind of toy to play with, right? There's no real reason why you would ever want to use this to do anything productive. But I think it's always fun to play with. If you upload any sort of geometric model, you can start to see how it can get distorted and maybe change your perception of what you've made. And yeah. Then Live Axon. This is purely kind of for the architects in the crowd. Live axon allows you to make a perfect oblique axonometric projection without actually shearing your model as typically you would have to do. Let me upload this model maybe. And so see here, I've uploaded the same model of the house that I had before, but it's being rotated in a oblique architectural projection, right? So this is a kind of very unique architectural toy that would be familiar to architects because it follows the convention of the oblique projection. But this allows you to do something that a lot of other animation software that doesn't come from architecture, that this is a kind of feature that most software doesn't have, essentially, right? This is purely a kind of disciplinary convention, and I'm playing with it in a kind of fun way. So you can kind of visualize your models in this weird, impossible projection. And you can also change colors. You can change the background color and just kind of have fun with it. You can take a screenshot. You can, screen record this if you want, or you can just show it live at an architectural review, for example. And then the latest one that I've made is kind of building off of what I was making with raster and my other generative art projects, which is a kind of low res aesthetic representation of information. And I'm really interested in low resolution representation because I think we as a society have been really privileging high resolution things for the past couple of years. We're just adding more pixels to the camera, more megapixel cameras are becoming more common, higher resolution TVs, screens, etc. So everyone's like more resolution. And I think that it's okay to take a break and say, well, what about less resolution? What if we represent things with fewer pixels? What kind of what is at stake when we represent things with fewer colors, fewer resolutions, limited color palettes, etc.? And so this is a visualizer that allows you to really kind of downgrade your visualization of your model so that it starts to look a little bit retro. I mean, there's a kind of retro aesthetic here as well, but also just this idea that maybe once you reduce the resolution of a project, you start to get at its core, diagram, maybe, so you can start to see the forms that you're making in a little bit more detail, and you start to omit some details that may not actually contribute to the understanding of the project or something like that, right? But also it's just a kind of fun toy, another one of these fun kind of things to play with, right? I mean, who doesn't like chunky, pixeled, dithered 3D models, right? And so I think that I'll leave it there, and just to say that I am really interested in kind of critical conversations about the instruments that are becoming more and more common in design and architecture. And so I really appreciate what Q and the P5JS team and all the contributors have been doing, because they've really opened up this discourse and are allowing us to think critically about what these tools actually allow us to do and how they fit into the broader kind of social context of the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Galo. So at this point in the series, I'd like to open it up to both of you. You've seen each other's work. You're also familiar with each other's work outside of just this talk. If there are any questions for that you may have for each other. If not, I have a bunch of questions that I'm curious about. I would love to ask, but it's not about me. So I'm going to open it up to y'all first.
And maybe I have a question. I really like the emphasis on myth making and storytelling. Is that something that is a kind of core part of your practice as a kind of exploration?
Thank you, Galo, for this wonderful question. I think because today maybe I only showed one personal project. That one has really strong focus on myth. Maybe that's the reason why you asked this question. I think I was telling Caco earlier, like if we have more time, I'd like to share this collaborative project with Xiaowei Wang, who was actually one of the speaker on our Access Day. That project is about like censorship and how we can resist it using software. So I would say like myth making is definitely something that I'm interested in. I haven't seen that as like a major part of my work, but I think definitely it's become it's like the focus of the most recent project that I had one, and I've been working with Tiade for the last 3 years on that, and I do find a lot of solace and in this process when we are thinking about myth and the one from the past and the one we can create for the future. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's really interesting because I've been thinking a little bit about like the myths that surround software, right? These sort of the myth of neutrality, right? Like that's something that I think is always kind of around because technology has been sort of isolated from politics and all of that for a long time, at least in the way that it's presented. And so I think that there's also like these social myths that are constructed, and I think that you showing that feedback that you get on like GitHub comments and that kind of stuff really shows just how pervasive a lot of that mythos is, right?
Yeah.
And I think countering it is a kind of a challenge.
Yeah. Thanks for making the connection of mythology in software too. In the essay I briefly shared in the presentation written by Lauren McCarthy called Making P5, Lauren did mention like that was this comment like, oh, people wanted us to think about software in this black box. Yeah, like because for folks who are not familiar with how software is made, they might just think that's a myth. Like it's, in this black box, we don't know how it's made, how it's going to work. And especially in this time of like AI hype, like folks who might think AI itself is a myth itself. It's a huge myth because, like the way how AI is, the database and how the model is built is like such a mythological process for a lot of users. So I think for P5, the project itself is like we are interested in like making them more open. So for folks who felt like it's the software itself is a myth can get their own idea of is that still a myth? How can we contribute to the conversation of software is in a black box and a huge myth? Yeah.
Even the Google searches that you had where like the idea of you're looking for information and it presents itself as neutral, but it was predominantly like male representations of the goddess or the deity. So I have a question for both of y'all about technology and creativity. I think around the same vein because you're using technology, which is something inherently like doesn't necessarily like the myth that it's not a creative thing, but like you are using the approach to tech and learning technology as a creative practice. How much of it is engaging in learning new tech to do the things that you want to do versus creating new processes for yourself that may not exist?
I feel like architecture training really provided me the path of like feel very comfortable with new tools because I feel like 5 years in architecture school, like we have to encounter new tools pretty much every semester. So yeah. I feel comfortable getting to new tools because of the training from architecture. And I think at a certain point you reach to the limit of like, okay, this is existing tools that we can use, but I do need to make something more customized for myself. For example, the Future Memory Project, collaboration with Xiaowei Wang, we made like a few tools. It's like pretty much a website that's a tool we can use to counter censorship. And so like often, my tool might be a repro of another tool. So I think tool making itself is almost like it's also like art practice. I've seen that from a lot of artists that really inspired me. It's like how do they utilize this process of making tool itself to expand their practice? And I feel like I see that in Galo's work. You're making this painting tool. The process of you making the tool itself produce the work. So was Galo making the painting tool, or was Galo making the painting, right? So that was like something I found it very interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think, architecture, it sort of comes with the current modes of practice. I've been writing a little bit about the history of digital fabrication, and I think there was a kind of turning point in the early 2000s when, for example, the first version of processing came out, and I think that there was also like early digital fabrication tools that became more accessible around that time, and so the maker movement and DIY as an ethos really took over in the discipline, and architects really latched on to this idea of making your own tools. Now, obviously, you can't make your own Revit or AutoCAD very easily, or 3D modeler without a lot of financing and people, but you can make small tools. And I think that as we in the professional design fields maybe get a little bit frustrated with those giants that seem to kind of hold us hostage, like Adobe and Autodesk, we can't get around them. They're too big. I think we're becoming a little bit more comfortable making smaller tools, right? And I think that this is part of my recent thinking around smaller things, right? Instead of thinking about big software, think about small software, and thinking about the tools that can really be personalized for you, right? And so what I thought was really cool in the sort of early 2000s, or between like 2005 and 2000, like let's say 13 or something like that, before P5JS, people were making tools and just giving them away for free just because it helped them. Like, they were making Grasshopper scripts, and they were making all of these different small little plugins and just giving them away. They weren't selling them. I mean, some people then decided that they could sell them, and obviously they should be compensated for their labor if that's really what they're going after. But a lot of the people, it didn't even fit into their practice. Like, why would I sell this? I'm just going to give it away for free, right? And so I think that there's also these social aspects of tool making that we should acknowledge and maybe even kind of foster, right? Because as soon as you're told that you can make your own tool and that you're given the knowledge to actually execute that, then all of a sudden you have ownership over it, and then you can share it with other people, and you can feel a little bit more liberated than being, let's say, boxed in to just the main industry standard tools. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I think it's liberatory in a way.
Yeah, it's very empowering to like participating in the process of making your own tool. Like, makes you feel like, well, I can actually do a lot more. Like I'm not limited by what the industry has to offer or what the companies has to offer for me.
And in that sense, and maybe to continue the question, is like, how close to the machine do you guys feel you are? Because with programming languages, there's a level of abstraction. How far do you need to go down to machine level and understanding that, versus how much you think you can get from the abstraction that exists? Because there's this like new wave of tools coming out, like no code programming. Like, where do you sit within the range of like programming abstraction?
I'm not 100% sure if I understand the question fully.
When making tools, like, how close do you feel like you need to get to machine understanding and programming for specific machines, or like that context? And how much value do you get from like existing at a certain level of abstraction and not needing to go down to the machine level. Because I think that there's a lot of approaches on like how technical you need to get and the value that you can receive from just like, creating artistic pieces using um, a programming language that is abstract and not having to like code in C, or you're not coding in assembly. Maybe you are. I don't know. Like maybe there's like value in going all the way down to the machine level. Is my question a little bit clear? Maybe not. I talk too much a little.
I can
bit.
contribute, but by not necessarily answering the question, but I can maybe share some reflection of that. I always feel like I'm not the most technical person ever. Like even though I teach coding, I told my students, I learn most of the coding through YouTube. So
yeah, me too.
I was like, so I always tell them like, you don't need to feel like you need to be that technical to make work or even make your own tool. Or you like often like you just need what you like you need to learn along the way. If you are making this upcoming work or tools, you're gonna just learn it through the process. And I think the best way to do that is just like, let's start making it, and then you will know more about what you don't know. Because I still feel like if you ask me a lot of questions about hardware or like the machine, tangible machine itself, I still feel like I'm not gonna give you the correct answer. But I sort of know how things work to extent that I know that I can make work out of it. But I wouldn't say myself as like that I'm so technically knowledgeable on all the aspects of it. But that hasn't stopped me of making work or making tool. Like, that's sort of like a little bit unknown is okay. That little bit uncertainty is fine. So I hope I contribute to that question with a little bit of my like personal reflection.
That's perfect, because I guess the point is you don't have, like, both of y'all are pretty technical, but there's this idea, I guess, back to the question of like myth and like how technical you have to be to engage with software programming, like tool making. Galo, do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the one aspect of that is accessibility, and I think that even what is that one language for kids, Scratch or something like that? Like that abstracts things very, very highly, so that it makes it accessible for kids. P5.js also is a layer of abstraction on top of JavaScript, and I think it's kind of like a personal journey in a way, especially if you haven't been trained as a computer scientist or a programmer, right? Because I wasn't trained. I learned Flash programming when I was in high school, just taught myself with books and stuff, and then eventually YouTube, right? But I do feel like sometimes I hit a wall and I do need to go down a layer to try to accomplish a certain goal that I have, right? So when I was programming some of these painting softwares, I realized that I was hitting a wall with P5.js, and that's just what happens, right? And so then I just went down to JavaScript, just pure JavaScript, and then I was like coding in pure JavaScript, and then I was coding in pure WebGL, which was very difficult in the beginning, and like very difficult to kind of wrap my head around. It was a totally different way of programming. And then eventually, I wanted to do something else. I wanted to do more real-time things. And so I went into C++ and Open Frameworks. So then Open Frameworks is also like a little bit more abstracted than regular C++. But still, that was another challenge. And just because I needed to accomplish a certain goal, right? And so what's really nice is that the learning materials are getting better. And YouTube tutorials are even though there's hundreds of them and you never know which one's good or bad, there's still a lot that you can draw from. And so I'm excited about that, because now you don't have to buy like a book that's this thick about C++ to learn how to make a 3D model in C++ or anything like that, right? But it is really part of your own journey, I think. Yeah.
Like what you said, Q, it's sometimes not knowing, like finding the thing that you don't understand is kind of like your next step. It's like, oh, this is the next thing that I have to do. I don't get this part, so that's what I'm going to learn. Yeah, I really love both of y'all's work. Thank you for taking time out of your day to share some of it with us today. I think it's really really, I guess the questions are trying to encourage other people who don't see themselves as like technical to engage with programming, software, tool making, all of the above, considering all of the the changes that are happening in like software and hardware right now. I think it'd be great if more people who didn't think that they were programmers started to try and learn. It's a new type of literacy. So thanks again for taking the time out of your day and sharing info with us. This is the end of our talk today, and stay tuned and join us again next week.
Thanks,
Thank you
Caco.
for having us.